Hello, and welcome to episode 11 of the ranking of every movie that I watched in 2020. Today I'll be unveiling movies 30 to 21. Let's get into it. And starting with number 30 is a movie that hits fairly close to my heart with it being about another movie about soccer. It is The Damned United, directed by Tom Hooper, who has directed The King's Speech, a Best Picture winner, but is also famous for directing Cats. This movie is the true story of manager Brian Clough and his tenure at Leeds United, of which did not end up going as planned. And the interesting thing about this movie is we see his rise to how he got picked for the job at Leeds, of which Leeds was a very prestigious team in England at the time during the late 60s, early 70s. And you see him in his first role at Derby County, and he's a success. The team starts off struggling, but he's able to rebuild them and turn them into a powerhouse in the English first division. And see him in this partnership with his manager, and they really get it going. But when he's offered a job at Leeds, he loses his innocence and is corrupted by this newfound power. And as a result, he's not able to gel well with the team. And specifically, what happened is Leeds struggled out of the gates and were not able to recover. And as a result, Clough was fired after less than 50 days in charge. And it just goes to show you how much managers even back then are scrutinized, and if you aren't, and how short of a leash they're given. It's a business it's a business at the end of the day, and it really, what this movie really does well is it shows us a perspective in that it isn't always meant to be, and that in life you're always going to find something out, you're always going to find something out of nothing, and even if we fail, we get right back up. And I think this movie does an excellent job in displaying that message in a very palatable way. Next movie on my list is My Dinner with Hervé. Now, this movie follows the true story of a wild night in Los Angeles between a journalist and actor Hervé Villechaize. And Hervé Villechaize was known for his role on Fantasy Island as Tattoo, the sidekick. And this movie also, while also being a true story, profiles the beginnings of Hervé, as he was this shy and obviously a height challenged young boy living in France who would end up rising to be one of the biggest movie stars in the world, starring in a James Bond film that would propel him to fame. And after receiving that fame, he becomes almost corrupted and develops a large ego, contradictory to his small stature. And it's not helped when he gets the role of a lifetime on Fantasy Island, and he develops this inflated head and thinks he's better than everyone, which ended up being his downfall, and is tragic in that sense. I you really empathize with him, because you see that he was troubled by his drug and alcohol abuse and wasn't able to be a success as he wanted to, make it up to his parents for his lack of stature. Furthermore, I think they couldn't have gotten a better actor than Peter Dinklage to play Hervé. Not because I think Dinklage just gives a excellent performance as Hervé. You buy into the fact that he is Hervé Villechaize, and you see all his flaws, and it's uncanny in the resemblance. And not to mention, Jamie Dornan shocked me, as I really only known him from the 50 Shades of Grey series, and he put in a generally great performance. And considering this is a TV film off of HBO, I was pleasantly surprised, to say the least. And it's just, and to see all their craziness that occurred in one night just started from innocent interview, and then goes on to basically recounting his life story. And it seems you're so entrenched in it the whole movie, and there's never a dull moment. Next up is 1917, a movie directed by the great Sam Mendes. Follows the story of a man who's trying to find his purpose in the world while also trying to fight off the inevitability that is World War One. And this movie is one of the most beautiful and thrilling movies that I've ever seen. In terms of how it was shot, the cinematography is astounding. You really feel like you're in the war, and particularly what stands out to me is the fact that this whole movie is one shot, and it's incredible in that sense how they were able to manipulate it so that it would look like it was filmed in one shot. And I have to give credit to the cinematography for that, and as well the performances from George McKay, who also so happened to star in Dunkirk. Although you don't really know a lot about him, you really buy into him as a soldier and how they were just like any other person. They really had no idea what was going on. They were scared for their life, and understandably so. I mean, they're put in a life or death situation. It's really unfortunate and no lose-lose situation. Furthermore, there's not really a antagonist in this movie. I would almost say this is a version of man versus man in the film world, and how obviously you have this conflict that was created by man, and at the same time he's this man played by George McKay is striving to find a way to survive, and while also being subjected to a number of obstacles, including the the enemy trying to find him and kill him, and you obviously rooting for him in that sense and to survive, and yeah, overall it's just such a great movie that was definitely worthy of a Best Picture nomination. Next on my list is Mitsumar, a movie directed by Ari Aster that is an almost an allegorical look into life itself. I would say the movie starts off. Besides for one scene that really sets up the tone of this movie, you wouldn't think that this is a horror movie. You'd think that this is almost like a road trip movie, as you have a group of friends who are traveling to Sweden as part of a uh, call it a university project to discover more about this peculiar festival that takes place every summer, Midsummer. Uh, while we're also introduced at the start to this character, Danny, played by Florence Pugh, who has experienced a tremendous amount of hardship, including the death of her entire family. And so we relate to her in that sense, and we see how poorly she's treated by her boyfriend, played by Jack Rayner, and we're hoping that she's able to overcome this hurdle and get the best of him. So when they get to Sweden and are exposed to this peculiar festival, they are perplexed at how strange the people act, and particularly they find themselves soon a part of this ritual where people end up falling to their deaths intentionally as a way of ridding some kind of spirit or something like that. And there and not to and when someone does this, the entire group at this festival collectively scream scream in agony as as did the person who fell to their death. And it's so creepy in that sense. Another scene that stands out to me and makes me sick to my stomach is a scene where they're gathering around this table, and one of the characters discovers a piece of pubic hair in their pie, and it sickens me even just thinking about that. And what I really like about this movie is that the whole message that of trying to seek independence, as evident with Danny, as she's so determined to find her independence after losing her family, and and her being stuck in a stagnant relationship with her boyfriend, and she's able to overcome that at the cost of losing her friends who are killed in scenarios that were just so happen to be coincidences. And it's very creepy in that sense. I mean, you have the scene where William Jackson Harper, who is excellent in this movie, is in the chapel looking for a way to see what looking for a way to see into these people and see into their minds, but he ends up getting killed. And the at the end, when Jack Rayner is basically drugged and put in a bear suit and burned alive, and it's so disturbing in that sense. But at the same time, it's also satisfying for Danny, as she's been subjected to so much pain, and finally she's been accepted by this cult, and there's nothing left for her to do but smile, and that's the literally the last scene of this movie. And I think that in this movie is a very weird experiment, but in some ways it's so weird that it's good. And I applaud Ari Aster for trying something different, because this is something that unlike any movie I've ever seen in my life, and I like it. Next up is The Farewell, a movie about a woman in New York who is unlike not too dissimilar from Mitsumar in that she's pu- looking for her purpose and struggling with work, and is called back to China to as her grandmother, the matriarch, is has had some serious health issues and is on the verge of passing away. And so this trip gives her a chance to look back on her life and how she's made some mistakes in the way, and really, and with her experiences with her grandmother, it humbles her and inspires her to make out a life of her own. And I think what you could say about this movie is that it's and compare similar to a movie that I will discuss later in my video. The You could say there's a burden of the fact that this movie is entirely in a different language, with being in Mandarin. But I wouldn't say that it is. And you can distinguish what's happening, what is going on in this movie without having to speak the language, and that's what I really like about it. And like with Midsommar, I think it really delves into the theme of community. And contrasted with Midsommar, it's not really about a cult, but about a unity of this family, and how it's disappeared after a number of them went their own ways. And that's just what happens with most families. Most families grow apart in some way or another, and you just have to accept it. It's part of life, and obviously you're going to cherish the memories that you had along the way. And I think this movie does that eloquently, as you really root for this family to get out their issues, as they are very dissentful towards one another at the start of the movie, but eventually they grow to rekindle some of that, and it's very satisfying to see that. And as a result, when the grandmother passes away, it's devastating, because you know how much she meant to every single member of that family, and how things will never be the same because of it. And overall, this is a great movie. This that should should be used as a lesson for how families should act. Next up is Apocalypse Now, a movie that came out over 40 years ago and experienced so much tur turmoil and un and unluckiness throughout the filming, which I couldn't even get to right now. But that it was came when it came out, it was praised as a masterpiece, and I would continue with that praise, as it has aged well, and particularly as this movie has garnered inspiration from the book Heart of Darkness. You see that those little inserts here and there from that book, but also of the major theme of this movie being the Vietnam War, and particularly when we're introduced to to this Captain Benjamin Willard. We first experience a very weird scene where he's dancing in a hotel room, and he's hearing while also hearing the sound of a helicopter blades, and that scene is probably isn't even probably the strangest scene in the movie, but it just goes to show the tone of this movie, and how Captain Willard is instructed to recover this Colonel Kurtz, who has gone mad and is retreated to the jungles of Vietnam. And we see him on his journey as to recover Colonel Kurtz while also experiencing battle himself. And particularly the scene that stands out is the Flight of the Valkyries. Scene with all the Black Hawk helicopters, and it's iconic in its own way. And seeing them in action is so tragic. Seeing how much destruction they caused, and I would say that even just the war cause in general. I mean and even you see the killing of innocent civilians just because, and it's tragic and it's unethical, and it just turns you off the thought of war and makes you grateful that you don't never have to experience anything like that. And it truly is an apocalypse now, and that was what it was thought. It was thought as this is the end of times, and however there was no way of really compensating for it. As Captain Willard comes close to recovering to accomplishing his objective of recovering Colonel Kurtz, he eventually finds him, only to discover he's basically created a cult and has gone mad, as said. And particularly Marlon Brando's performance is out of this world. I mean, he just perfectly captures, and gets to think he barely had time to perfect his performance, and he didn't even know his lines, and just the whole behind the scenes of this movie is almost as fascinating as the movie itself. And the fact that they were able to turn this movie into such a success boggles me. And I mean, having watched the director's cut, almost being 3 hours long, it's definitely a journey to watch through. But you definitely leave feeling satisfied, even though Captain Willard doesn't really win in the end, and it's really Colonel Kurtz who wins. It is something you don't often see, and definitely did not see in movies of the time. Number 24 is Inception, movie directed by Christopher Nolan, and this movie has some elements that are similar to another movie that I watched, Tenet. And this movie is an interesting delve into the element of time. And particularly what I like about this movie is how it's not afraid to take a risk, and usually time travel movies have a similar gimmick to them. Like with Back to the Future, that's really what comes to mind first when I think of time travel movies. But no, with Inception, it completely shatters that assumption, as this movie is about a group who are tasked with going into dreams and almost finding a way of discovering oneself through dreams. And seeing the worlds that are creating these dreams is just fascinating. And as they meet this Japanese businessman at the start, of which a scene which would come in handy later on in foreshadowing, we're introduced to this character called Dom Cobb, played by Leonardo DiCaprio, and his backstory is really well developed. You know, we empathize with him because of the fact that he has 2 kids and he had a wife. We soon realize committed suicide because she was not able to distinguish between what was reality and what was a dream. And that's really what it comes down to. The theme of this movie is how do we distinguish what's real and what's not. And I really like what it does in that sense. Obviously, the big task of this movie is to help out with retrieving this large amount of what is believed to be a large amount of money that is stored away by the dying businessman and his son. And so they end up going into this businessman's dream, and it delves into a dream inside a dream inside a dream. And just even think about that, I can almost incomprehend what that even is. And what I like about this movie is it makes dreaming simplistic in a sense that it uses exposition to describe what happens in this world with the natural laws of this world, which I really commend. Obviously, what I also like about this movie is the score, and specifically the famous by Hans Zimmer is so iconic. And for that, I think Inception will go down as one of the best films of the past decade, and potentially is one of the best films of all time. It is so thought provoking and a touching film that I think anyone could relate to. Next up is the best picture from this past year, Parasite, a movie directed by Bong Joon-ho, of whom will have a movie featured by another movie featured by him later on in this countdown. What I like about this movie is the fact that it delves into the distinction between classes, and particularly the rich and the poor. And you're introduced to this family in Seoul who are they're living on paycheck to paycheck, and while also you see that while even though they may not be the richest family, they still get a lot out of life, and very they're still very happy. And that's juxtaposed with this rich family, of which one of the members of the family ends up becoming a tutor for. You see that while they have a lot of money, it doesn't necessarily make them any happier, and they still have like, for example, the couple still has problems with their marriage and their trust issues, and their kids aren't the most nice to be around. So in that way, I really liked it. I mean, I know that when it comes to the finale, they kind of go overboard with the amount of gore, but I think it was inevitable in the sense that there was another family that was living just underneath in the basement of the rich people's house, and they had values that also differed from the Kim family, of which you see they end up basically taking over their house because they end up infiltrating their entire family through a series of different occupations, unknowingly to the rich family in hand. And so in that sense, I think there's a lot of clever themes in this movie, particularly being the distinction between the rich and the poor, that are eloquently on display. And overall, I think this movie was most definitely deserved of the Best Picture award, last year's Oscars. Next up is Wally, a movie that is very sentimental to me as I grew up watching it, and is one of my top 5 favorite Pixar films of all time. And I really have nothing bad to say about this movie. I mean, you have it being set in a future Earth, of which is almost the revelation that it's actually Earth is almost as big as what Planet of the Apes did, and I commend it for that, because it's almost unrecognizable. I mean, there's so much garbage on the planet. There's obviously no sign of human life, and we're just met by this one lonely robot, basically named
Wally.
and while at the same time you see all his quirks and how invested he is in learning more about the human species, and he's not obviously he's not and through this little snippet of a movie, and through that he's able to see how human life um occurred, and he develops, like with what he sees in the little video, he desires to find someone to love. And when a robot is sent down to analyze if the earth is fit enough for herbal life named Eva, he soon discovers the an attraction to her, even though they're of completely different worlds and make. But he's not willing to let that get out of the way, and he shows a tremendous amount of affection towards her, and tries to get her attention. And when she does find this little plant that he uncovered, she goes into this hyper sleep, and Wally is so desperate to get her to wake up, and it's so tragic because you're rooting for him to, because he's so likable. And while ends up getting brought back by the ship, he ends up jumping onto the ship and and is brought into an adventure. While also he learns more about himself and Eva. And I think it's a very clever movie that obviously is trying to delve onto the subject of that if we of saving the environment. And I think that's a very important message, especially for kids, and it's still relevant today. And I think that the what one of the things that makes this movie work is the fact that there's very little to no talking or dialogue, and that's all you can do is that the better the movie is when there's little to no dialogue. Just goes to show you how they can still make a compelling story out of little to no dialogue, and I absolutely commend them for that because it was almost a genius. And this movie will go down like with Inception and Parasite as an iconic film for generations. And last but not least for today is a movie that features another very wholesome character, Paddington. Now, like similar to Wally, Paddington is about a bear who lives in Peru and who was forced to flee Peru after his grandfather perished and his grandmother was scared for his life. And you see him, this innocent bear who just so happens to talk as well, and he's eventually left at this. He eventually gets his way to England, and particularly to London, and is left at Paddington Station, where he is found by the Brown family and taken in. And they're reluctant to take him in as he's almost prejudiced against him because he's different and he talks and it's something unlike anything they've seen before. And so obviously anyone would be kind of skeptical seeing this kind of creature and for the first time. But Paddington is a genuinely nice being, and it doesn't matter that he's a bear, he's sentient, and as a result he should be treated no differently. And he experiences trust issues with his newfound family, and just by being himself, he's able to receive the love that he's always craved. And in that, it's so wholesome as it's trying to promote a message of acceptance. And I really admire the movie for that. Obviously, you have the main conflict being that Nicole Kidman is a character is trying to get revenge on Paddington for what he did to her dad back about 50 years ago. And so she's trying to capture him and put him in this museum, and she's trying to taxidermy him. But as the Brown family perseveres and gathers her family together, they are able to stop Nicole Kidman's character from taxidermying Paddington, and they're able to foil her plan. And it's such a relief because there was a legitimate chance that he could have been taxidermied, and it would have been a horrible thing to see, as even he's a rare species. And just goes to show we should all be grateful for the kind of the life we live, and to live life to the fullest. And I think that's what this movie promotes, and I really think that's a great message to promote. Anyway, that's my list for today. Leave a like and subscribe if you'd like to see more. Join me next time as I unveil movies 20 to 11. We're getting close to the end, I promise. Arrivederci.